Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadin Paschatya Desha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gauda Bhakta Vrinda Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gauda Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gauda Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gauda Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhu Is that on?
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada 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 Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So,
Yes.
one, the camera has to be much, much closer to me. And secondly, when you say like he has a PhD, you should say where, because that's the normal thing. For programs, they say PhD here, PhD there, that's the standard. So, yeah, we need to bring this much closer.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second day, welcoming His Holiness H.D.Goswami Das Goswami, to Oregon. What a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Thank you for that nice kirtan.
Is there any way to put it like more?
Of course. Why don't we get rid of this?
Sure. Okay, do I hear $20 for the, I'm gonna auction this off now.
Thank you. So many moving parts. So maybe we do a fill in the blanks game. We are especially honored to welcome His Holiness H.D.Goswami Das Goswami here this weekend, celebrating Krishna's appearance day and the appearance day of Srila Prabhupada. H.D.Goswami Das Goswami is one of the senior disciples of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and a pioneering teacher of Bhakti Yoga, one of ISKCON's most respected spiritual leaders.
Uh-oh.
I know.
That doesn't say much for ISKCON, does it?
Okay, H.D.Goswami Das Goswami, aka Dr. Howard Resnick, is a distinguished scholar holding a PhD in Sanskrit and India studies from Harvard University, and is fluent in several languages, including Spanish and Portuguese. And English. He's also learning slang. He currently serves as the academic director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies in Gainesville, Florida, where he leads important conversations bridging science, philosophy, and spirituality. As the founder of Krishna West, he is also offering a thoughtful and culturally relevant expression of Krishna consciousness that speaks directly to the modern Western mind and heart, while remaining deeply faithful to Srila Prabhupada's mission. He's known for his sharp intellect, which you'll find today, and his warm heart.
No pressure.
Yes, as we hear from him today, I invite you all to listen attentively with an open mind. So please join me in a warm welcome. His Holiness H.D.Goswami Das Goswami.
Can we put that in front of me?
Yes, okay.
Oops.
Just in case.
Oh my God. Do I have to look at myself all the time? I'm going to put it on the other kind of view so I don't have to see this big picture of myself. Let's see, gallery. Oh, I know. So, today is the birthday of Srila Prabhupada, the founder and spiritual teacher of ISKCON. It's a term in Sanskrit, founder, acharya. Acharya in Sanskrit can mean teacher, professor. It comes from a root, which means to act, chara, and then achara means good conduct. It's just like, for example, a mother may say to her child, behave yourself. and technically anything the child does is behavior. But when you say behave yourself, you mean good behavior. And so something like that in Sanskrit, also the word acharya or achara means conduct, and then acharya means it has special meaning. Like, so a teacher is not supposed to be a hypocrite. That's the real point of it. That a teacher is not simply someone that knows something or believes he or she knows something, but someone that actually is practicing what they preach, and the practice should result in excellent character so you can observe it. Otherwise, how could there be, and this is a topic I really want to focus on in honor of Prabhupada today. Let me put it this way: can there be such a thing as a spiritual science? And this is something I deal with a lot in my sort of clandestine life as an academic. And so just maybe very briefly give you a historical context. We'll just quickly in a minute race through about a few thousand years of history. For most of human history, like well over 90% of human history, and basically everywhere in the world, people accepted that there are two kinds of objective facts. One of them is physical, and the other is metaphysical. And meta, of course, in Greek, metaphysical meaning above or beyond or after the physics. This goes back to the school of Aristotle. Our society is actually based on metaphysical facts as well as physical facts. For example, it's a physical fact that, as far as we know, this is Salem, Oregon, unless we are actually somehow trapped in a very powerful Twilight Zone episode or something. But let's say belief that everyone should get equal justice under the law. That's not a physical fact. Or the idea that certain actions are morally good or bad. Like, for example, it's morally bad, even reprehensible, let's say, to injure, even kill an innocent person. Now, that's not an empirical fact. I mean, philosophers have known that forever, that it's not a physical fact that it's wrong to kill innocent people, and yet it's a fact. Because what would it even mean to say it like I can talk about this table, this computer, my shirt, and so many things, and they're obviously physical things. We can see, hear, touch, smell, and taste them. However, there's no imaginable empirical test that would tell you that it's wrong to kill innocent people. So let's say someone does, as happens, kill an innocent person, and then let's say people properly trained come in and they investigate all the forensics of it. Like, what was the murder weapon? Where was the person standing when they fired the murder weapon? And so on and so forth. And, there's all this forensic evidence, but none of that will reveal the wrongness of it. Because ethics, good and bad, are not physical, they're metaphysical facts. Or our equality, for example, every imaginable empirical test will show that we're not equal. I mean, I challenge anyone, anywhere, to show me an empirical test that will show that all human beings are equal. Athletically, intellectually, artistically, any possible way. For example, our conviction that some things in the world are beautiful. So there are certain places in the world where millions and millions of people go, thus basically destroying the quality of life there. But still, because there's this widespread agreement that those places are beautiful, there are certain faces, there are certain people that the world considers to be beautiful. So there's large-scale agreement, but empirically, there's no such thing as something being beautiful. All you could say, sort of in an anthropological vein, all you could say is that human beings, let's say in the 21st century, because notions of beauty change over time, but let's say human beings in the 21st century consider faces to be attractive when they have certain mathematical ratios, like, for example, the distance from the hairline to the bridge of the nose, or the distance between the eyes and the distance from the eyes, let's say maybe to the ears or something, the distance perhaps from the nose to the lips, from the lips to the chin, the width, the ratio of width to height of the face. And so you could say that human beings at a particular time in history believed that with certain ratios and proportions, faces were beautiful. But to say they are objectively beautiful would be a metaphysical claim. And it gets even more striking. For example, another thing that we all accept, but we cannot empirically prove, is yesterday. Because it's like every item on the face of the earth that's dates, time-stamped or something, obviously could be rigged. Or actually, we're all this kind of, I don't know, sort of weird skepticism comes from. It originally, in Western philosophy, it came from Descartes. Honk if you love Descartes. But so Descartes wrote a book called The Meditations. It's a very famous book in Western philosophy. It was like a watershed moment in Western philosophy, in which he said, this was in the 1600s, he invented things like graphs. He was like a genius scientist, mathematician, and philosopher, a smart guy. And he thought he'd do a thought experiment. He said that, what if I doubt everything that I think is true? Everything. Are there objective facts that I can restore to certainty within my mind? And of course, this is kind of amusing. He wrote an introduction to this book in which he addresses the professors at the Sorbonne, which at that time was a heavily Catholic institution, in which basically to save his neck, he thought, I'm too young to be burned at the stake. So he wrote this introduction in which he said, hey guys, we all know that the truth is everything the church says. And we all know that. However, some people are so unfortunate, they doubt some of the things the church says. So for these poor fools, I thought I'd write this book. But you wonder, maybe he had his own doubts. But anyway, so he did that to save his neck. But what's interesting is that he gives one example, which is really had a really powerful effect on Western philosophy, and that is, he said, what if you and I, are simply brains in the laboratory of some kind of crazy genius, wicked genius, who's making us think, for example, that we're sitting in a room like that, or that there even is such a thing as a state of Oregon. I guess a fact which people in some parts of the country wish was not a fact, but anyway, so what if I doubt everything? I mean, how do I know that I'm not just a brain in a laboratory? Sort of a forerunner of Rod Serling, did all the Twilight Zone episodes. Anyway, so then he said, well, is there something I can't doubt? Is there something which would be ludicrous, which means comically absurd? Is there something which I cannot, as a rational human being, doubt? And he said, yes, there is. What I cannot doubt is that, as he put it in Latin, cogito ergo sum. I'm thinking, therefore I exist. Wherever I am, in a laboratory or in Paris or wherever I am, I cannot doubt that I exist, because I couldn't doubt unless I did exist. And I can't doubt that I have a mind. Anyway, the good news is he then builds on that foundation, so he restores all these spiritual truths back to certainty, like there's a God and there's a soul and so on and so forth. But then again, even the idea that, let's say, I think, therefore, cogito, like cognition, I think, therefore I am, You can't empirically prove that. Or let me put it this way, and this is a well-known problem in philosophy, how you cannot prove that other people have minds. What if, for example, I mean, I'm sure that I exist, that I'm thinking, I'm not just some kind of robot, but I don't know about you, because because what if, unbeknownst to me, robot science has gone way beyond what I'm being told by my new BFF, ChatGPT, and so, I mean, obviously, I don't really think that. I don't want you to, panic here and wonder about my sanity. I don't think that, but you can't prove it empirically. There's no way that I can. There's no way I can prove empirically that you actually are conscious. How could I empirically prove that? So it doesn't mean all these things aren't true. It just means they're not empirical. And if you think about it, the empirical method, what is the heart of the empirical method? It's the controlled experiment. Which means if you don't have control, you can't test anything. So to give an example of something that you can never empirically study merely by your own will, and that is the person sitting next to you, or your best friend, or your next door neighbor, or anyone. Why? Because what if they just say, no thanks, I don't want to take part in this, somewhat eccentric experiment. You can't force them because access, like they sent up this Webb telescope, and they found out, the universe is really big. And so, but you see, that depends on having access, because what if, let's say some galaxy up there just said, sorry, you're invading my privacy, and just put a big screen up. As far as we know, galaxies don't do that. Or do we really know that? Because, in other words, if someone says that you have to empirically study, like the typical thing that people who basically wouldn't know real philosophy if they tripped over it, they say things like, well, if God exists, prove it. Which is like, it's a silly thing to say for the simple reason that if I could empirically prove God, it would be the case that I can control God. I can drag God into a laboratory. Let's say, for example, you're trying to get a job, and you're going for a job interview, and you've read, job interviews for dummies and all that. And so, and let's say the people you are trying to get to hire you, let's say they have 100 applicants for that one position, and you really need the job, and they really don't need you. But still, you're trying for the job. So in that case, you can't say to them, prove to me that, this is a good job. You have to please them. The way you gain access to something that's more powerful than you is by trying to ingratiate yourself, by trying to please the greater power. And so if you're actually trying to know God, and let's assume that God is greater than us, I mean, even in America, I think people are not that egotistical, to think that I'm greater than God. Then it means that you would have to somehow or other get on the good side of God because you can't control God. So that's, devotion. And that's basically what all the world religions teach, that the burden is on you. You have to prove yourself to God. If you go into a job interview, and again, they got a huge number of people they could choose from, and they don't need you and you need them. You can't go in there and say, prove yourself to me, prove that I should even accept your offer. I mean, obviously, you'll be escorted out. So to say that actually about 100 years ago, roughly 100 years ago, a movement arose in Europe, which was kind of silly, called logical positivism. And it was the idea, because what was happening is that science was advancing very quickly. There was an explosion of new science, and science was dividing and then subdividing into all these different departments. I mean, the things that we now recognize, whether it's biology, microbiology, chemistry, all these things. Before, you had sort of like the Renaissance person type thing where you kind of knew a little bit of everything. And so this hyper specialization was taking place. And it started around the end of the 1800s, and then in the early 20th century, it just kept going. And so, in fact, before that, they didn't have the word scientist. That was invented not that long ago. People were called natural philosophers. So, because it was understood that if you're doing science, you also have to know something about philosophy, and I'll give an example of that in a second. And so science became very proud. Scientists became, no, not science, but scientists became very proud, and they sort of thought, who needs philosophers? Who needs philosophy? We are autonomous. We know everything. And so this led this attack of enlarged ego led to an idea called logical positivism starting around 1920. And in Vienna, actually, it was called the Wienkreis, which in German means the Vienna Circle. And you know these things? Oh, I thought maybe you, oh.
Yeah, I've read about it.
Oh, good. I'm glad. So basically, they said that let's say you're speaking English for our purpose. If you say something or assert something or affirm something which cannot be empirically proved, what you said is actually meaningless. It's not only that, well, we don't know if it's true or not, you didn't say anything at all. Because it's just like babbling. You actually didn't say anything intelligible. It's pretty radical. There's only one little problem with this. And this sort of trickled down to the people on the street as, prove it. If you think that, prove it. Meaning empirically prove it. There's one little problem, which philosophers began to realize, and of course they had pie in their face because it took them a while to realize it. And that is that that claim is self-contradictory. It's like never say never, because if I say we can't accept anything as a fact or even as meaningful unless it's empirically proved, but you cannot empirically prove that statement. Because that's actually a metaphysical statement. Because it's a judgment about the nature of reality, which cannot be empirically proved or disproved. So anyway, today is Prabhupada's birthday, and so the reason I'm bringing up all of this is because I think there's an interesting question: can there be a spiritual science? And if so, what would it look like? Because if there can be a spiritual science, then anyone interested in spiritual things should go for the science and not merely beliefs or superstitions or hopes or dreams or prayers, but actually go for the spiritual science. And so what would have to be the case? What would it look like? What would it have to be the case? What would have to be the case for there to be a spiritual science? And of course, the claim that I'm making is that Prabhupada was a spiritual scientist, and that by following him, we are actually engaged in a spiritual science. And so I'll try to persuade you of that. And if I don't persuade you, of course, you get a refund. So. Because if you look in the dictionary under science, one definition is sort of the materialistic definition, but that's not the original idea, and it's not the only one in the dictionary. Science, is there a dictionary in this computer?
Which dictionary do you want?
Any dictionary. Is
Should
this
we go
Apple?
to-
Yeah, just
Yes.
the Apple dictionary.
Okay, sorry. I need to turn. It's hard to work sideways. Bear with me. Dictionary.
There it is.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So I'll read the definition for science. This is the sort of notoriously incomplete Apple dictionary. It's interesting. Actually, I think we need to, because the Apple Dictionary is not a good one. It says, the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world, blah, 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 a particular area of science. Or, okay, it's not as bad as I thought. It's not great, but it's, and that is, they say, a systematically organized body of knowledge of a particular subject. A systematically organized body of knowledge on a particular subject. So that definition allows there to be a spiritual science. You could have a systematic body of knowledge. And if you think about it, okay, I want to channel Aristotle now. So Aristotle is the father of Western logic. And he said there must be a God on logical grounds. Aristotle was not like the most, let's say, religious person. Like, he wasn't into religious rituals or prayer or anything. He concluded that, unlike Plato, of course, anyway, it's a different story of Plato. But Aristotle said it's a logical requirement. And so I want to go into that logical requirement, which will lead us back to Prabhupada. And Aristotle's argument is still active today in academic philosophy. It's called the argument from contingency. And something is contingent in the sense it's dependent. Like if you say, are you coming to the program tomorrow? I'd say, well, it's contingent on something else. So contingent means dependent. Aristotle pointed out that when you claim that something is true, or when you claim that you know something, the problem is that someone can demand that you prove it. And to give a simple example I've given so many times, every time I give this example, I think, why do I always forget to come up with a new example so I don't bore myself so much? But okay, imagine, for example, the simple claim that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. And someone says, I don't believe that, prove it. So you put a pot of water on the stove, and then you put a thermometer in it, and you turn the heat on, and at exactly 100 degrees Celsius, the water boils. And you say, I proved it. And the person says, no, you didn't, because I don't believe that's pure water. You might have put some chemical in the water that changes the boiling point. It's a good example for a restaurant, right? Or, for example, maybe the mercury. Maybe that's not real mercury. So then you've got to prove that. Then you've got to prove the water and mercury testing chemicals. And so this will go on forever. And not just this, you can give many examples yourself. So Aristotle said that in order to avoid the disaster of being pushed into an infinite regress of proofs, where you're just going backwards forever, in order to avoid that, you have to claim or show that something is self-evident. It proves itself. So to give one simple example, well, before I give that simple example, and so Aristotle said that because everything we can observe in this world, I mean, this computer, the building, the Earth planet, the sun, the moon, all these things, they depend on something else for their existence. I mean, there's, astronomers can go through the whole process of star formation. Or you can say this computer used to be all kinds of other things, taken out of the earth and modified in certain ways. Your shirt, everything. Anything you can point to in this world, any physical thing, used to be something else. And it depends for its existence on what it used to be. Like, for example, we exist because of our parents, and they exist because of their parents. So everything is contingent. So Aristotle raised the simple question, how could anything have ever come to exist? I mean, it's a pretty scary thought, but we can think it. Not that we believe it, but we can at least think that, what if nothing had ever existed? And so the fact that everything does exist means that there must be, just like there must be a self-evident fact in the world, which gets our whole knowledge system going. We can build on it, the foundation. So there must be something in the universe that is not contingent, that doesn't depend upon anything else for its existence. It's self-existing. It caused itself to exist. And he said, and then Aristotle said, and I call that God. So this is the argument from contingency. There must be a self-existing, non-contingent fact, entity in the universe. Otherwise, how could anything have ever existed? So applying this to science, and what I want to show now is that science, as much as religion, depends upon I wouldn't say a leap of faith, maybe it's a shuffle. I wouldn't call it a leap, but it depends on all material science, empirical science starts out with an act of faith. And that act of faith is that there's a real world outside of my mind. In other words, you can't prove that. You can't prove that it gets back to the point of Descartes. You can't prove that there's a real world outside of your mind. However, if you want to be a scientist, then you just say, okay, well, I'm just going to assume that's true. Why? Because the world presents itself to me in a way that persuades me that it's real. To give another example, of course, scientists gave up philosophy and therefore became kind of philosophically stupid. To give another example, let's say you wake up from a dream and you quickly decide that what you were just experiencing was a dream and now you're awake. So that the world you're perceiving now, because you're awake, is the real world, and the dream world was in fact a dream world. You can't prove that empirically. Why? Because your dream is not empirically available. How are you going to get your dream into a laboratory? And I don't mean, let's say maybe you're wired so that some scientist is sort of monitoring all your brain movements or something. But those brain movements are not your subjective experience. And so when they say that, you sometimes may hear something, I mean, they say things that are really, I'm sorry I keep using the S word, but, stupid, but it really is. One of the most obvious fallacies in logic is to equate correlation with causation. In other words, the fact that these two things occur usually together, therefore one caused the other. So, I mean, that's silly. So for example, in fact, if you ever hear someone say, we now know that consciousness comes from the brain, you should know that person is philosophically a fool. First of all, because we can only correlate, not even show causation, we can only correlate certain neurological states, brain states, with certain other things, like let's say moods or perception of colors or things. What they cannot do is correlate brain states with abstract thinking. They can't do that. In other words, like for example, the abstract notion that there's a God. That doesn't correlate to any particular brain state. Plus, even if it does correlate, it doesn't mean that one causes the other. For example, that would be like, imagine if I turned this lamp on, if I was able to, which apparently I'm not. Okay, imagine I just turned that lamp on. I have a limited skill set, you see, it's too much, that's what too much philosophy will do to you. So imagine if I turn the lamp on and therefore I conclude that lamps cause electric light. I mean, that's pretty stupid. If I turn a lamp on and say lamps create electric light, what lamps really do is they conduct light. And so the brain conducts consciousness. Now, so Therefore, science, when they assume there's a real world outside their minds and so on and so forth, that's their metaphysical leap. That's their leap of faith. They can't prove it. Because, and this goes back to Aristotle. I mean, these poor scientists have had like almost 2,500 years to clue in, and apparently they just haven't got around to it. But let me give you another example. Another example of thinking you're doing science when in fact you're doing metaphysics. And that's what it is, it's metaphysics, if you say there's a real world outside your mind. It may be a true metaphysical claim, but it's metaphysical. I spoke at an academic conference recently. When am I going to get a real job? Anyway, I spoke at an academic conference recently, and so one of the speakers was apparently an atheist, a scientist who came over from the University of Florida to speak at our conference. It was in Gainesville. And he was talking about evolution. That was the topic of the conference. And he said that 99.9% of all the known mutations that have occurred through history were not selected because they did not confer upon the mutated being any reproductive or survival advantage. And so therefore they weren't selected, and they just, they didn't make the team. They didn't make the cut. Right. Now, and then he said, and I think he thought he was being like really clever here. He said that, well, if God made all this, why would it be so inefficient? Now, when I spoke then, my point was that that point is interesting, but actually it's not a scientific point, it's a theological point. Because you're saying that, let's say if you believe that most mutations don't get selected, they don't make the team, okay, you could say that's science to the extent you've observed that. But to say that if God existed, this is what God would do, that's not science, that's theology. So he doesn't even know what domain he's in. It's like if you're, let's say, speaking about algebra and you think you're doing, I don't know, 19th century French art history or something. It's just, you don't even know where you are. And so it occurred to me that it's a principle of logic that if you say, let's say about any particular statement, if you say it's true or it's false, in both cases you're in the same domain. Obviously, you don't know what I'm talking about, so I'll explain what I mean. Let's say, for example, you're giving a simple spelling test to a group of students. If you mark one of the words wrong, you're claiming to know spelling. Or if you mark it right. So whether you mark a word correctly spelled or incorrectly spelled, in both cases, you're claiming to know spelling. If you mark, if you say an algebraic equation, like 2x equals y, then, and so if you as a teacher or whoever say, okay, this is a correct equation, or if you say it's not, in both cases, you're claiming to know algebra. So if you say, for example, just to give an example I hope no one is emotionally attached to, if you say Zeus is the god of thunder and lightning, if anyone here is emotionally attached to Zeus, I want to be sensitive here, and we have a safe space in the next room for you with Play-Doh and other things. Anyway, so if you say that Zeus is the god of thunder and lightning, and you can't say that in a public university or even a private one because that's a religious claim, and if you're a professor, you can't make religious claims. But the problem is, if you say Zeus is not the god of thunder and lightning, that's equally a religious claim. So in other words, especially in public universities, you are allowed to preach religion as long as you do it negatively. When I was in Harvard, I was in one seminar, and the professor was a nice guy. We were friends. He was talking about these ancient, elaborate Vedic fire sacrifices where they would offer things into the fire, produce all kinds of amazing things. And then he said, well, of course, none of us actually believe that that happens. And then I said, well, not exactly. So because, political correctness definitely ruled the moment, and so he had to respect my views. But so in other words, people don't know what the hell they're talking about. When they preach the religion of materialism, thinking it's science. It's a religion. And it's all based on metaphysical claims. So getting back to Prabhupada now. So I claim that Prabhupada was a spiritual scientist, and he actually is sort of educating and producing more spiritual scientists, and that the Krishna consciousness movement, when it's functioning properly, which we have our good days, when it's actually functioning properly, that the Hare Krishna movement is in fact a spiritual science. It doesn't mean everyone who chants Hare Krishna is a spiritual scientist. Because for example, let's say there's a science of cardiology, which, thank God, there's a science of cardiology, because people in my family, their lives were saved because there was a science of cardiology. But it doesn't mean that if someone, let's say, has some problem with their heart, if there's no cardiologist around, the science won't help. You need a scientist. And so, when I joined the Hare Krishna movement, what was I thinking, right? But anyway, when I joined the Hare Krishna movement, that's what I signed up for. I wasn't signing up for like a new religion. I already had one. My parents gave me a religion. It was nice. So I was actually looking for a spiritual science. And I found one. And so now I'll get, what does it mean to say Prabhupada is a spiritual scientist? What does that actually mean? What it means is that there's a body of knowledge, and I would say the body of knowledge is systematic. It's not just like kaleidoscopic, someone like tripping on something and just saying all kinds of disconnected things. But actually there's a systematic body of knowledge, and there is a reliable, repeatable, transferable process to directly experience that knowledge. So that I was told that Prabhupada said that God is actually infinitely beautiful. Wouldn't that be disappointing if you went to all the trouble to go to heaven and God was he's not ugly, but he's just not like, he's not, I wouldn't call him handsome. So, because if you think about it, God in Vedanta, that's sort of like the heavyweight philosophical arena in Indian history, where the greatest minds would debate different philosophies and worldviews and so on. And so that text begins with a statement. The first statement is atato brahma jigyasa, which in Sanskrit means now then, the search for the absolute. And so commentators, there's this brilliant intellectual tradition in India. It's interesting that things have kind of degraded. So now if you read any sort of standard textbook on Hinduism, one of the first things they'll say is Hindus aren't really concerned with orthodoxy, which ortho means straight, like correct, like orthodontics. So that's ortho. And then doxy is sort of philosophy or belief, so in other words, having a coherent, systematic understanding of things, orthodoxy, according to a particular tradition. And then praxis, of course, just means practice. So orthopraxis means if you do the rituals correctly, we don't really care what your beliefs are, just, do the ritual right. And so, so they have this extremely powerful intellectual, theological, philosophical tradition with their own sort of system of logic, which in no way depended on Western logic. And And now it's come to the point where we don't care about philosophy or theology. It's just about, do the ritual right. So that's something attributed to Hinduism, which not only doesn't reflect the history, it practically betrays it. So anyway, when things were a little more coherent, and they had this Vedanta tradition. Veda means knowledge. By the way, I mean, there's Sanskrit all over the English language, as I've explained many times. I mean, we could just go on all week talking about English words from Sanskrit. But the word Veda, for example, we have the word, which comes from the root wit, and we have the word wit. It's spelled vit, but actually, anyway, won't get into ancient phonology, but, oh, I thought you were telling me don't get into the phonology. So, the word wit, the word vision, or in Italian, which of course is heavily based on Latin, the verb to see is vedere. Vedere. Io vedo, which means I see in Italian. So anyway, so the real point here is that, so an anta means the end, which we also have in English. End, E-N-D, A-N-T. It's because D and T phonetically are in the same category. Anyway, trust me. So, end is end. So Vedanta. Now, what these great commentators realized is that how can you start a book saying now then? Because now then means something came before it. So what do they mean, now then? Let us search for absolute knowledge. And what they say is that's an indication that you have to be ready. Now then means you've already figured out the obvious, that you're never going to be happy just trying to exploit your body. You're never going to be happy trying to exploit someone else's body. And you're never going to achieve really deep eternal knowledge just by doing little chemical experiments in laboratories. And so if you've understood that, then you can proceed, go to the next stage, which is the search for absolute truth. In other words, something which is always true and true everywhere, which doesn't, by the way, apply to the physical laws of nature, according to current science, because they say there was a Big Bang. And so what went bang? Because they say, the universe, nothing exists for that, but then the problem is that before the Big Bang, there were no laws of nature, because the physical laws of nature came out with the Big Bang, and so therefore, the Big Bang could not have occurred in obedience to any known laws. And if there was nothing, what went bang? So it's kind of a terrible theory. Not the theory of the expanding universe, but the atheistic attempt to, and they really get pie on their face. So in any case, if you're trying to understand the absolute truth, there's a process to realize it. That process was called in Sanskrit yoga. And the physical, the postures and everything were because if you're going to sit down as people used to do for like 50 years and meditate, you're going to get unbelievable cramps, and basically you're going to die of your postures if your body's not conditioned properly. And so if you ever heard of Ashtanga yoga? Yeah, Ashta, 8, obviously cognate with ocho in Spanish, Ashta, and also the word 8, acht. So the Sanskrit word Ashta, 8, is, you find it in practically all European languages. Anyway, Ashtanga, 8 limbs. So it's interesting, if you know that the yama niyama basically is you have to be a decent human being. You can't be like someone has a criminal mind. In other words, you can't be a modern politician. You can't be someone with a criminal mind, or someone who is just passionate and envious of other people, or not regulated, you don't get up on time. So the first two, yama niyama, just to get you mentally, ethically in shape. And then asana, of course, you have to sit properly. And then pranayama, the breathing exercises. So if you think about it, that's all the preparation. That's all the preparation, because meditation is going to come several steps later. So at this point, you're just preparing yourself for your great adventure. So yama niyama, asana, pranayama, and then pratyahara. This is very interesting. Prati in Sanskrit means sort of like the English counter, like counteraction, or like in the opposite way. And so what it means, and ahara, if it's getting too painful, all this Sanskrit, indicate that by screaming and running out of the room. But anyway, so the Sanskrit root her, as like the English word her, and then it becomes hara, means taking. And it also can mean like consuming, it can mean eating. And so in this case, ahara, the prefix means taking in or bringing. And so the idea of pratyahara is that, and why you get the prati on it, is because in normal life, which is pretty mundane, our consciousness is traveling through our senses out into the world, and we are hunting for pleasurable sights, sounds, touches, fragrances, and flavors. So it's like that's what the senses do. They're on the hunt all the time. And they're sort of, sometimes it's called grazing, although grazing is kind of a little more sedate than what we often do. So that is called, so that's ahara, where you're out there. So prati means you reverse that. Instead of the senses going out into the world, you pull them back within. You pull your consciousness back within. That's literally what pratyahara means. And then pratyahara, and then dharana. Dharana just means hang on, because, actually that's what it means. Just hang on, because we are so conditioned to go out in the world to look for pleasurable things that when you try to bring your senses and your consciousness back within, it keeps bouncing back out, which is why, entrepreneurial gurus only ask you to meditate for 5 minutes or something. So you bring your consciousness back, and then you just hang on, sustain that. That's what dharana means. And then dhyana, and then you start meditating. So it's at that point you actually are stepping onto the spiritual platform. That's when the real yoga starts. Because the word yoga means to connect, to link. And that's when you really start to connect with the highest truth. Everything before that is to prepare your body, prepare your mind, your breathing, your senses, just to prepare everything so that you can meditate. Because what if you try to meditate seriously and, you're thinking about that apple pie you had yesterday, or you're thinking about, some other person, or, I can't believe she said that to me, or so. And so, or anything, or, I'm hungry. I don't need more food, but I'm hungry. And so, all kinds of things. So you start meditating when everything's under control. And then finally, samadhi. So samadhi, you've heard of samadhi. It has three semantic elements. There's three parts to the word. The word sam, which we still have in English, by the way. It came straight into English as S-U-M, the sum, the total. So sum means totally, completely. Like I said, there's Sanskrit everywhere in English. So S-U-M, sum, or it actually came to English in two ways, as the word sum, but also through the Greek as the prefix S-Y-N, like synthesis, the complete thesis. You bring everything together, the complete thesis. That S-Y-N is also Sanskrit through Greek. So anyway, so that's sum. So completely, and then is an intensifier in this case as a prefix, and D means to place. So you place your consciousness completely and intensely in the object. And what is the object? Now, if you know Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, there are different stages of samadhi. And he finally says, samadhi siddhi. Siddhi means perfection and other things. So he says the perfection of samadhi. In other words, if samadhi is the perfection of Ashtanga Yoga, there's something which is the perfection of samadhi. So Patanjali is saying there's something which is the perfection of yoga. And what is that? Ishvara pranidhanat, devoting yourself to God. Probably not nearly as secular as some people would wish, but that is what he said. So getting back, so the idea is the reason this stuff has been going on for thousands and thousands of years, like forever, is because it works if you do it right. And that ultimately you can have what is called Deva Darshana, a direct audience with God. And that's why it's been going on for so long with so much devotion. And not only in let's say, in the Indian way or the Vedic way of doing things. I would say that this is kind of the most sophisticated, the most advanced iteration of it. But the reason that most human beings who ever lived anywhere on earth were convinced that there's some kind of divine reality. Of course, we know what the atheists will say. Well, that doesn't prove anything. However, is that really true? When they say that, they show that they don't know philosophy very well. Because if you say that the fact that most human beings that ever lived anywhere on earth at any time believe that there is something real which is somehow divine and ultimately a God, if you say that doesn't prove anything, then that you are claiming a radical skepticism about human testimony. Now, if you argue that we should have radical, this very extreme skepticism about human testimony, what about the human testimony that say there's a real world out there? In other words, do you really want to be so extreme in your rejection of human testimony? What about human testimony that it's wrong to kill innocent people? You can't empirically prove that either. What about human testimony that people should be treated equally? They should have equal justice under the law. What about human testimony that some things are really art or really beautiful? For example, the sort of the complete idiocy of this sort of atheism about philosophy. Like, for example, I remember being a kid and hearing in class that we used to wonder why the sky is blue. Now we know why the sky is blue, atmospheric science. But that's a really foolish thing to say, because we don't know why the sky is blue. We know how the sky is blue. So, for example, let's say you are a paint chemist. Anyone? How many paint chemists do we have here? No? Anyway, so let's say you're a paint chemist and let's say you're in a museum and there's some great work of art. And so you can say, oh, in this landscape painting, I know why the sky is blue. Well, technically you know how the sky is blue. Because the question why, like to give an example, if I say, why did you come today? And you say, oh, I drove. You didn't understand the question. Or if I say, how did you come? And you say, oh, because I was interested. So how and why, by the way, we have to give a nod to my friend and yours, Socrates, who actually, honk if you love Socrates. Socrates, in the last day of his life, he decided to drink the hemlock. He could have escaped by the way, he was condemned to death by democratic government. But when he was condemned to death, he wasn't supposed to really die. In Athens, they would condemn you to death, and then what you were supposed to do is sneak out of town and never come back. They kind of look the other way. You sneak out of town, you never come back to Athens. That's what was supposed to happen. And in fact, the friends of Socrates told him that it's all arranged. We got the boat. The boat's at the dock. And then Socrates shocked everyone and said, no, I think I'll just drink the hemlock. And the reason he gave is that he said, well, by living in Athens and taking advantage of all the opportunities here and benefits, I entered into a social contract with the government of Athens, and I want to be honorable and keep my side of the contract. I mean, personally, I would have taken the boat. But anyway, and lived to philosophize another day. But anyway, he did that. So the last day of his life before he drinks the hemlock is, and this is, of course, Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates. It's, anyway, amazing people. So Plato wrote a dialogue about the last day of Socrates' life called the Phaedo. And Socrates decides to spend the last day of his life not on Netflix, but he decides that he's going to philosophize. And so he asks this question, which gets right to the heart of what I was just discussing. He says, if someone asks why Socrates sitting here on his cot, they sort of like Indian style, these cots, why is Socrates sitting here? And if someone says, well, because he's sitting here because his body's made in such a way that it bends at certain joints, and that's how he's sitting here. And then Socrates says, no, that's how I'm sitting here. Why I'm sitting here is because I made a decision based on my values. So similarly, if you ask the simple question, who understands a work of art more profoundly, let's say, is it the paint chemist or the art historian? And so if you say, we know why the sky is blue, that's a metaphysical claim, not an empirical claim. Because the question, I mean, I'm using, of course, why in a strict sense, because the question why calls for a teleological answer. In Greek, telos means purpose, like the reason you do something. And so an answer should explain, if I say, why are you here, or why did you do whatever? And if I say why, then you have to explain your motive, your purpose. What were you trying to accomplish by doing that? And so actually science does not know why the sky is blue. Has no clue. It only knows how the sky is blue. So in this way, there's so much confused language. There's so much nonsense going on. And so we're trying to, so Prabhupada, in fact, just to get to the point, the reason that most people that ever lived believe there is some important part of reality which is not physical and which is somehow celestial or divine or something like that, is because it's really there. It's because it's really there, and actually everyone got it right. And so the very fact that we have free will, one of the most famous atheist philosophers of the last 50 years, a man named, oh my God, I know he has a name. I forgot his name. He taught at Berkeley forever. But anyway, he's an atheist, but he said that the problem with atheism is that if you say there's nothing real except physical things, what about free will? What do you do with free will? Because free will is not, like if you roll a ball down a hill and you know all the relevant facts about it, like how steep is the hill, the ball, everything, is it a rough surface or a smooth surface and everything, then you can actually predict exactly how fast the ball will roll down the hill. But you can't predict, there's no hard science of human behavior because we have free will. And so he said, if you are sort of a strict atheist, physicalist, then from the very moment of the Big Bang, we knew what you're gonna, what kind of soup you're gonna have tomorrow for lunch, because we have no free will. He said, but the problem with that is no one can live like that. To stay with our food analogy here, let's say you go to a restaurant. Let's say you go to Venti's restaurant. That was a deal. I get a free meal after the talk if I mention her. Yeah. So let's say you're in a restaurant and the waiter or waitress comes, says, what do you want to order? And you say, I'm waiting for my neurology to speak, because I have no free will. I mean, after a certain amount of time, you'll be escorted out of the restaurant. You can't live like that. You have to make decisions. Therefore, there's free will. So anyway, you can have a science of God for the simple reason that God is real, and we are made in such a way that we can know God. Some people say no one has ever seen God. And exactly how do you know that? It's interesting, isn't it? Universalized in your own condition. Like, I haven't seen God. If I can't see God, no one has seen God. But actually, you have this, even just the whole yoga science, where for thousands and thousands of years, Krishna in the Gita, he always talks about knowing, deep knowing, as seeing. In Sanskrit, the word is darshana. Seeing, you see the truth. You actually see the truth. And so if someone says you can't see God, well, how do they know? And actually, you can know God. You can see God, and therefore there can be a spiritual science. Do you have a Gita guide here?
To your right on the little table.
Okay. Infomercial alert.
Yes.
Yeah, we have Bhagavad Gita here, which I wrote. And I didn't write it, Krishna spoke it, but I wrote that particular book just when you thought I wasn't an egomaniac. So anyway, there's one section in the book where it's a whole section where Krishna repeatedly talks about knowing, deep knowing, as seeing. You see the truth. You see the truth. And therefore there can be a spiritual science. And Prabhupada came and persuaded a lot of people that by his conduct, by his behavior. I spent a lot of time with Prabhupada. I wasn't with him all the time, but I certainly spent more than enough time with Prabhupada to see if he was one of the typical enlightened gurus that, I don't know how to say, I'm trying to be delicate here, can't keep his pants on. So, and Prabhupada really, he was a real thing. He was a real thing. Believe me, I'm not a cult follower. I'm like the opposite. I'm kind of like a skeptic by nature. That's why I'm skeptical of materialism, for one thing. But Prabhupada's a real thing. He was just always in that higher state of consciousness by his behavior, by the way he dealt with people, by the way he spoke, just by everything, by the way he lived his life. So, any questions on these points? See if you can, stump the guru. Now's your chance. Yes. Yes.
My question is about Srila Prabhupada, and what would you say, no matter where we're at in our practice, there's always somewhere deeper that we can go, and could you give one example of, or one thing that anyone can do anywhere in their practice to be closer to the example that Srila Prabhupada set for us?
Yeah, you can sing, you can dance, you can eat. Prabhupada used to talk about this because we offer the food to Krishna. And of course, offering food to God, that's a very old thing. God or the gods. If you know your Odyssey, Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, respectable people never have a meal until they've offered it to the gods. Of course, they had, their pantheon. But so the idea that food is a gift and you have to show gratitude for the gift, like say grace, in every tradition. So in that sense, to eat without acknowledging that it's a gift is kind of barbaric. And so, that's something that everyone can do. It's, I learned that when I was a little kid. I think it was my 5th birthday party or something. I still remember, and my Aunt Elizabeth came. And to the door, I was this 5-year-old kid, and she was my mother's older sister. And I was so excited that it was my birthday. You know, when you're a little kid, your birthday is like, it is going to heaven. And so there was a knock at the door, and I remember I ran to the door as she was coming to the door, and I said, you know, what did you get me? And my mother called me aside. I had a really great mother, which is why I'm, you know, sort of reasonably civilized. And, you know, she called me aside and told me, you know, you don't do that. And I never forgot. I never forgot that. So gratitude, in fact, Krishna talks about, in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, there's this beautiful verse, which I think is just so powerful. And I'll tell you what it means literally, because often it's not translated literally, but the literal sense is really amazing. Krishna says, evam pravartitam chakram. You know the word chakra, which means can be a wheel or a circle. And so Krishna says literally a wheel or a cycle has been made to turn. Anyway, past, passive, causative form of the verb. So, evam pravartitam chakram, a wheel, a cycle has been made to turn. Nanuvarti atiha jaha, and in this world, one who does not keep the cycle turning. One who does not keep the cycle turning. Nanu varti atihaja aghayur. They're ayur, you know Ayurveda. Ayur actually means duration of life. So Ayurveda is knowledge to prolong the duration of life. So agha, and agha means offense, sin. Their whole life, their whole ayur is an offense against the universe. Aghayur indriya ramo, because they're simply trying to exploit their own senses. And mogang partha sajivati, that person lives in vain. So what he's talking about, there's a context there, is that by, we're born to this world, and we have bodies that have strength, we work, we produce food, and then it rains, and the food grows, and then we offer it back. You know, I don't mean we literally starve ourselves, but you make an offering, which you find in every religion, in every serious culture, where you make an offering. And then Krishna says, apradayhyabhyo yo bhunte, if you want to enjoy all these gifts, I mean, oxygen is a gift, food is a gift, water is a gift, our bodies are gifts. These are all gifts. And so Krishna says, if you take these things and don't offer back in gratitude, Krishna says, such a person, stena eva, that person is literally nothing but a thief. So just as you're just sort of a cosmic shoplifter, you know, you didn't go by the checkout stand. And so we do that, we offer back because we're learning to be civilized. It's not that, it's just like, it's not that your parents, let's say I had very good parents, not that, you know, they needed the little gift I got them on their birthday, which was paid for by the other parent, you know, whoever's birthday it was. And for some reason, every year I got my mother for like 5 years, these really multicolored little soap balls that, you know, we got at Save On Drugstore. And somehow that was it. I couldn't come up with anything else for my mother for years, but she was always really pleased and really surprised. And so,
That's why you kept doing it.
yeah, so it's not that my mother or my mom or my dad, it's not they needed these things, but they wanted us to learn how to love. That's how good parents teach their children how to love and be a decent person, by teaching them reciprocation, reciprocity. It's like that. There's a song back in the 60s called Since I Fell for You, Lenny Welch. Anyone know that? Oh my God, people. Anyway, it's a great song, but it begins, the word, very profound words, it begins, if you just give love and never get love, you'd better let love depart. And so, in other words, reciprocity. reciprocity. So any simple act of reciprocation gets us going on our spiritual life. Just a simple little thank you before you eat. And so on. So anyway, it's very simple. So anything else? Yes. Hey, nice to see you again.
You as well. How do you feel like your diet affects your ability to connect with Krishna?
Oh yeah, God loves every soul. It's, in fact, I remember I had a friend who was not a friend actually. Somehow it's sort of like a friend. We got into a discussion on the internet. He was a professor at a Catholic college, and he was a specialist in Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian Thomas Aquinas. And he admitted, as in the course of our discussion, that his students really got upset by a particular teaching of Aquinas, which he got from Aristotle. You know, it's very common thing to say among philosophers that Aquinas baptized Aristotle. You know, he kind of... So that animals actually don't have souls, and therefore they're just basically machines. And yeah, I mean, this is crazy. And this professor admitted his students really rebel against that. You know, like your dog has no feelings, it's just a machine. Or for the other group, your cat. So, so because all living beings have life, we have a moral duty to minimize the pain and suffering we cause other creatures. And so our diet should reflect that. It's a question of, because if we want God to be compassionate upon us, we have to be compassionate. In a sense, what God does, and he does it also through the laws of karma, because there's a word for this in psychology, where you sort of reflect back on someone what they're putting out, and you sort of, I forget, there's some word for it, but
Mirroring?
what?
Is it mirroring?
Yeah, mirror, I mean, that certainly expresses it. So actually, if you think of what the universe is with the law of karma, it's just it's huge. It's a huge cosmic sensitivity training. So that whatever we do, it comes back to us. So if you do something good and it comes back to you, let's say you were generous, and therefore in this life, maybe you have all you need, or you're, either maybe not rich, but at least you're comfortable, certainly compared to other people in the world. And so that's, encouraging you to continue to help others. And then if we commit acts of violence against sentient creatures, then inevitably it bounces back to us, because that's how else will we learn? It's just, karma just means the universe holds up a mirror to you and say, this is what you did. So it's like that, great Bob Dylan song, How Does It Feel? So that's what karma is. It's a big mirror, so you can know whether you really help people or really harm them. So there you go. Did that answer your question? Or did I stray?
Yes, yes.
I'm like an honest man. Okay, tell me what wasn't covered.
Like, I think that, like, with respect to, being having a good soul and having a clean soul, I understand that. But your capacity to feel like you're connected,
Yes.
that actual sort of interface, whether or not you're meditating or whether it's within your yoga practice.
Yeah, or it could be in a church or synagogue.
Right, and sometimes you just feel spiritual.
Yes.
Sometimes you feel less.
Yeah, that's kind of like when they used to do it. Maybe COVID wiped that out. But you go into a supermarket and they give you a little sample on a toothpick. So it's that's what the universe. That's what Krishna's doing. When you feel good, you're giving a little. Here's a sample. If you like it, buy the package. So if it feels good being good, then try being good all the time. It's funny, the obvious way to feel good about yourself is be a good person. If we care more about feeling good than being good, then we didn't get it. And so, yeah, if you have moments, sort of sublime consciousness, or you're at peace with the world, and you feel a certain charity toward everyone, or whatever, or toward yourself, then that's a gift. It's like, I remember, I've never actually, have to admit, never downloaded music in my life. I mean, I've just never had. I play music a lot and I listen to music, but I just remember, I don't know if it's still like that, but let's say they would give you a little sample, like here's like maybe 15 seconds of the song or something. If you like it, buy it. Or you're reading some article online. So if you want to continue reading this article, subscribe to something you absolutely don't want to subscribe to. And so that's what it is. It's actually a kindness on the part of God to, here's an experience. And you're a rational human being. You can see this is the life you should have all the time. So now work for it, earn it. Yes.
In that same context, is the Lord pointing us in that direction by using these terms, sattva guna versus shuddha sattva?
Yeah, well, sattva guna means the quality of goodness. In the Bhagavad Gita, let's get into a little Bhagavad Gita jargon. The word sattva means goodness. Sat, like satsanga. And so sattva means the state of being sat, of being in touch with real existence, your real goodness. So in this world, goodness is, superior to other states. In fact, Krishna says, tasmat atra sattvang nirmalatvat. Because sattva, because virtue, goodness, is free of gross contamination. Atra sattvang nirmalatvat prakashakam. Literally, it's enlightening. Prakashakam. And anamayam, it's free of sort of really lower states of consciousness. But then Krishna says, sukha sangena badnati. But even that worldly goodness, it binds you. But that's where we get the word bind, or bond, badnati, banda. So sukha sangena, it binds you to that happiness, because there's a kind of happiness where it's almost like you're trying to relish your own happiness. Like, I'm so happy now, and you're really kind of grooving. I'm dating myself there. You're really, I thought I'd give you a little, since you all are you totally adore the boomers, who in no way have a bad reputation. We try to enjoy our own happiness. Like you can be virtuous, and because it's like a natural high. Like if I'm just good to people and I'm kind to people, and you kind of want everybody to know how kind and good I am. So it binds you. You become sort of entangled in your own pleasure at being good. And then jnana sangena, or you become proud or happy by your wisdom. Like you're kind of, you're sort of proud of being wise. And as soon as we become proud of something, we're caught again. We're trapped again by illusion. And so goodness, you could say mundane goodness, or it's certainly better than nothing. I mean, it's certainly the best material state. But then there's shuddha in Sanskrit means purified or pure. So shuddha sattva means goodness which is free of any trace amount of wanting to enjoy this world, rather than just doing the right thing and naturally being happy. You're not trying to enjoy, you're just happy spiritually. So that's purified goods. That's a spiritual platform, because ultimately, let's say I'm virtuous, and I'm charitable, and I'm generous, and I'm merciful, which are all good qualities. But Can you really be, that is the ghost in the machine. Can you really be perfectly virtuous if you're not grateful to the person who gave you everything? If you just are, because charity has a little, it has its payoff, because by definition, charity goes down. Someone more fortunate gives to someone less fortunate. You don't give charity to someone who's richer than you. Like, hey, here's $1, go get yourself a, bottle of water or something. I mean, so you don't give charity to people who are more fortunate than you. You give charity. So the act of giving charity is, it has a little buzz to it. Or being selfless. No, you go first. And you feel good about yourself. So when you're on the pure spiritual platform, there's none of that. It's just pure goodness. And you're grateful to God who gave you everything. So if you don't acknowledge God, how could it be pure goodness? How could it? Because there's still some ego. It's like, okay, I'm good, but I don't want someone to be better than me. I'll admit that other good people are like me, but I don't want someone to be infinitely better than me. And so even if you, quote unquote, believe in God, there's what I call philosophical atheism and there's psychological atheism. Philosophical atheism means I don't believe in God. Psychological atheism means that I may believe in God, but on a given day, at a given moment, I want to be the center of my life. I don't want to be decentered by God. I don't want anyone in the room to be more important than me, even if it's God. And so I kind of know there's a God, but in my day-to-day life, moment to moment, psychologically, mentally, I want to be in the center. And so in that sense, bhakti yoga really requires that first of all, we believe that if I give up this false ego, ahankara, then I will come to a state of awareness and happiness, which is far, far beyond that. So I'm only depriving myself by clinging on to my self-centeredness. And I mean, the obvious fact is we're not the center. We can be psychologically self-centered, but does anyone here really think that, I'm the center of the universe? If you do, we're all gonna do a GoFundMe to get you treatment. So, yeah, so that's the difference, basically, between the two. So, anything else? Well, thank you all for coming. It's really a pleasure to be able to spend some time with you. And Hare Krishna. Hey, Nalini. Hasta luego.
Hare Krishna.
There's a wonderful lady